Military people, have you ever slept with someone foreign while stationed overseas, and if so, what's the story there? I was in Greece for a port call and met this girl at a bar music event. Got liquored up and she takes me back to her place and we do our thing. I had overnight liberty so I didn't have to be back for 2 days for duty section, so I stayed. Woke up the next morning and went to slide out and her entire damn family was sitting around the table eating breakfast. It was an oh-duck moment. I didn't know until then that they are one big happy family living together. It was clear what happened with her and so I thought her father and her one brother might want to have a word with me. Nope, they all invited me to sit down and fixed me a Cretan pie or whatever they called it, and I chatted with them for a bit. At first it was weird and I thought they were going to try to stab me, but they were wonderful people. Literally 99% of the military does when stationed in Korea. When I was single, all the married guys used me as an excuse to go to clubs. About 3 months into my second tour in Germany, me and a friend went clubbing. A young lady celebrating her birthday noticed me, told her friend. Her friend lied to me and said she wanted to talk to me. We talked. That was April 1998. We are still together. 3 kids and a cat. I should have married her, but I was young and very, very stupid and immature. But it's all good. 17 years later, after a lot of bad relationships, I hit pay dirt. But occasionally, late at night, I admit I wonder what might have been. I'm female and got out of the military a few years ago. I honestly regret that I never did. I met a guy on Tinder in Germany once and thought for sure it was going down. He came over to my apartment. I was ready. Turned out he was Albanian and very religious. And he really was only interested in Netflix and chilling. After that I met the guy who is still my so to this day. So I never did get the chance. My great grandfather was a Polish air pilot during World War II. Ended up crashing and going to an English hospital. Met my great grandmother, Scottish nurse. Got married and started a family. I never got with a foreigner while overseas, though if you count Hawaii as being overseas. I met my girlfriend who's from Hawaii while stationed at Hickam. We did get a warning about hooking up with foreign women and cheating on your significant other. While in basic training though, one of the drill instructors told us a story about a guy who was married with kids and was on an unaccompanied tour in Korea. Unaccompanied means his family wasn't with him. While in Korea he managed to get a Korean girlfriend and even got engaged to her, without telling her he had a family back in the States. When it was time for him to leave Korea, he just up and left without even so much of a word to his Korean mistress. So this Korean woman discovered where this guy and his family lived in Texas, and flew there with her sister, rented a car, and drove to his house and raised holy hell on his front yard in front of him and his whole family. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Went out partying. Girls wanted to party with and tag along. Usually you'll get a few glances from girls and there's a big confidence boost when you consider that you'll likely never see that person again, so just shoot your shot and odds are good you'll land one. Girls often go out looking for foreign men for both non-committal and long-term relationships. Also being underway, the main outlet for stress is working out. So you get a bunch of fit young dudes showing up with wads of cash looking to party and a desire to nut, so it's win-win for both parties. I'm not military, but I'm from a small South American country that Western military used to visit back in the day around 30 years ago. From the stories my mum told me, the guys would regularly show up in bars looking for local women to hook up with. Some of the women did end having children for the men, which is one of the reasons why there's white looking people in our country. A majority of our population is either black or Asian, and the rest are mixed. A few of the men did fall in love with the local women and took them back to their Western home countries. I'm not sure if my mum ever hooked up with any of the military men, but I'm pretty sure my gran did back in her day because most of her kids look half white. Not my story exactly, but my dad was stationed in Germany around 1985 and got into a relationship with an English woman. He gets sent back to America and later meets my mom. My mom overhears my dad talking with some military friends about this English woman and crazy lies, but didn't really think it was true. Flash forward to 2018 and turns out that my dad in fact got that English woman pregnant and just left her after he got orders to go back to America. She goes to his commander to try and stop this, or something to this effect, I'm not too sure. He tells his commander that it's all bullet. She's a crazy itch, please don't make him stay. So he goes and this woman raises his kid without anyone ever finding out. The child of this relationship finally found my dad in 2018 and well, now I have an English half brother. Even more weird, my dad has another daughter from wife number 2 who he insisted had to be called Alex, and this English child is a son also named Alex. My family and I believe he fully knew about this kid and per usual just didn't give enough it to take responsibility. I love to joke about this with my dad who was in the Navy for 20 years. I just know I have Cuban half siblings but he insists otherwise. I was in Dubai when I was in the Navy around 2005. A buddy and myself met 2 women from the UK. They were vacationing and we all ended up at the Hard Rock there. At the end of the night I was behind the bushes on one side of the entrance going to town on one chick and my buddy was behind the bushes on the other side with the other. So we got to duck under the giant guitar while all our others friends kept a lookout just in case. That's why friends made in the military last a lifetime. Or sometimes. My grandfather had an illegitimate child that the family only knew about post-death. He hid that his whole life. My grandmother only found out when the child, now adult, reached out to the family from the UK. I guess he was messing World War II around and impregnated a woman. Knew about it and left the country to avoid being a parent. Second generation military here. My father went as part of a relief mission near the equator, vague to save my identity, and he wound up with a girlfriend while still married to my mother. He wound up being sent home early and never got a medal for going. I'm pretty sure this was because of the girlfriend. This whole issue was one of many reasons my parents divorced. Young American men, in good shape, in another country. Find me one that hasn't slept with a local. Not military, but kinda have a relevant story. When I was backpacking through continental Europe, 2013/14, I was partying at a hostel in Rome. I wasn't staying there myself, but they offered beer pong in the basement, which was a small club. A guy comes over and we start playing. We start talking and I find out he's a Marine. On leave from work in the US military near enough Rome he could hop the train in. Anyways, I think he's a cool dude. And always interested people who've seen a lot of the world and how it compares to home. Anyways, eventually we've played so long we're both hammered and he comes out and says, "Hey, throwing it out there, but I'm gay and I think you're hot. Would you like to come back to my room?" I probably wasn't ready for this, but I like to think I handled it well, saying sorry for any confusion. But I'm straight. Thank you for compliment. He understood and I asked him about what's that like, being in the military and being gay. He hadn't came out to anyone he knew or worked with, which to me sounded awful, living with such a secret. So I said, "Hey, if you want to dance, I'd be cool with that." And so we danced together. Then afterward, he said thanks and I asked him how often he's able to hook up with guys. And he shows me his Grindr. Dude had like 10 messages on the go with guys in Rome that day alone. Admittedly, he didn't hook up with anyone that night. But I was like, damn, this guy gets matches. I wish my Tinder was this busy. Anyways, he got no more free dances from me that night. But I did have a great time chatting him up. Who else are they going to sleep with while overseas than foreigners? The story is the same as it is in the USA. You get yourself down to the pub club bar, get a few drinks and you and have a go at chatting someone up. Exactly the way it works all over the world. Mayo, almost all military people while stationed overseas did this. I know someone that deployed to Okinawa in the 80s. He was my friend's father and my friend at 15 years old found out that the father had cheated on his wife and had a half sibling. Well, that half sibling came looking for the father when we were both in high school. Lots of drama ensued. My grandfather was stationed in Germany during the Vietnam War. Don't ask why, cause I'm not sure. And he told me he would often deliver mail to houses in the countryside. He told me that he would visit one home so commonly that he ended acquainting with one of the housewives while her husband was away at work. Well, one thing led to another and my grandpa ended up breaking up a German family. The funniest part of it all was that when he finished telling the story he added, "And that was the first time I contracted gonorrhea mayo. I wouldn't be here if my grandfather didn't do this in Korea." Cousin did in Korea. Now he has a beautiful kid but unfortunately a batshit crazy ex-wife. She went mental after the kid was born and disappeared. No one could find her until his deployment was ending and he was coming back with his daughter. She reappears out of nowhere and the legal snafus were numerous, with her trying to reclaim the kid. I'm not sure exactly what happened but it got so bad that he got assistance from the army to get his kid out, as she abandoned them and they were divorced. It was nuts. 8 is in Germany. I'm from the US. Was pretty fluent in German, having started learning it in middle school and continuing through college. Met a girl from Saarland. At the time, English wasn't compulsory in her school. She opted for French, so she spoke no English at all. We were totally in love, and as my tour there drew to a close, we entertained thoughts of marriage, but I couldn't see bringing her to the US, compelling her to relearn her nursing studies in English, while I spent so much time in the field. That goodbye was among the most painful experiences of my life. If I had been thinking, I would have extended my tour there, married her, and I'd be a German right now, and I could watch the IT show that the US has become from afar. I feel like Ask Reddit is slowly morphing into free erotic literature fodder. My military dad slutted it up wherever he went. Years ago my dad got a call from an Australian woman, we are in US, and told him she thinks he may be her father. We were all in our 30s at the time but it was kind of exciting to think we may have another sister. My dad went to get the paternity test done but it turned out he wasn't her father. He was actually sad about it and expressed how sorry he was and that he hopes she finds who she's looking for. I hope she did too. He mentioned he wouldn't be surprised if we have a bunch of siblings around the world. My grandfather was Air Force and met my grandmother while stationed in the UK. Now my family spans 3 continents. Makes me wonder if my grandpa, who spent many years between Korean War, Vietnam War, and Secret War in Laos had slept with women throughout Asia and impregnated 1 or more women and I got cousins in Asia that I don't even know about. I met her in Hawaii and she is a Pacific Islander from Saipan. I slept with her literally the first day thinking it was going to be a one night stand. Got married 6 months later and have been with her since 2014. I don't know how we make it work but we do and I love her more than anything. No kids but I have 5 cats. One of these days I'll convince her to let me get a dog. 1 year in Korea. Hooked up with a Korean girl one time that I met at a bar. Similar event happened on New Year's Eve with a Russian girl. Neither of them became things. Later on, I dated a British girl who taught English in Seoul for 4 months or so. Nice girl. Still Facebook friends with her. Weirdly enough I hooked up with and had flings with a bunch of American girls while there. Seoul is awash in English teachers from the West and that was my preferred demographic. Though I am sure many other service members will tell you about gypsies. Basically prostitutes in all but name. I thought it was a pretty shady practice so I tended to steer clear of juicy bars. 6 months in Estonia working at the US Embassy in the Defense Attaché office. The guy I replaced urged me to use Tinder. While we were doing our transition, I tried to delicately breach the subject. I was single, 27 and had broken up with a girl in the States literally the day before I left. So I was ready to mingle. How is the social scene here? He had a smirk on his face and just said, Tinder works. I had a lot of fun running around Tallinn with a few Estonians and Finns. 2 tours in Afghanistan and there. I got nothing. Local girls didn't seem very interested. Truth be told, in 18 months, including 9 as an advisor to an Afghan unit where I worked with Afghans every day, I never met a single Afghan woman. I would be surprised if you had anybody tell you about any sort of romantic success in the Middle East with locals. Not saying it hasn't happened but I've never heard of it. I was doing a NATO visit and slept with a Danish intel officer who looked like Kate Beckinsale. Ended up in a relationship with her for about 6 months. She was absolutely fine but I was too immature at the time for it to last. Interestingly, the UK major overseeing the trip said I should be careful because it might have implications on her career. What about my career? Military service I sexist AF. OWW I can contribute. Well, I was technically the foreigner from Canada doing my service in the Swiss military. Oddly I was considered exotic by the local chicks in Zurich. I slayed like MF. I doubled my body count in 6 months. It was nuts considering that the people there mostly didn't have a very positive view of their own military. I guess it really helped that my wingman was a brother in arm. It had a long-term effect on me, to be honest. Positive and negative, but overall I grew a lot from that whole year of my life. When I was in Okinawa, there was a bar that was near my apartment that me and my buddies hung out at. The bartender and owner was an old man who just surfed all day and ran his bar at night. But importantly kept the town patrol out so we could hang out past curfew. One night at the bar we met some girls and just hung out all night. The girl I was with went back to my place with me and got frisky, like you would see in a porn video. She made the high-pitched squeak moaning and was completely out of sync, so you knew she was faking it. I couldn't help it and just started laughing my ass off. I could not stop laughing and just had to stop. She seemed very confused at first and then really embarrassed and pissed off and then left shortly after. I ran into her again at the bar a week or so later and we dated for the rest of the 3 years that I was there. I was a 20-year US military member stationed in Asia. Taught English at a community center once a week. Asked out a girl in the class just after she was graduated HS. We dated for 6 months, then I had to leave the country. Stayed in touch. Married 18 months later. Still happily married 27 years later. There's a lot of German American kids playing soccer in Europe, lol. Not in the military, but one time a US Navy carrier docked in the port city where I grew up and 9 months later there was a huge spike in pregnancies with local residents. It must have been all those seamen. I lived in Germany as a kid. Dad worked for the Air Force. In the early 80s there was a bar in Kaiserslautern named the Wild Cherry. It was a funk rant bar where the black GIs would hang out. They would get dressed up and go down there to party and get their game on. I never went in, but my friends and I would go by there when we were out carousing and talk to the guys hanging out outside. They were always in a very chill mood. The German ladies went absolutely apit over this. As I remember, German dudes were infamous for treating women like it back then. But any German girl could walk into the Wild Cherry and be treated like a queen. And, it goes without saying, ducked long and hard. It caused a lot of resentment amongst the local yokel guys, but I thought it was funny as hell. Not me, by my cousin. He told me the funniest story about meeting girls overseas. They were partying in Thailand and his sergeant was dancing with this hot girl and disappeared with her. The next day they asked him how it went and he said she was grabbing his junk a lot and he was like, hell yeah, let's go. Then he reached down to grab her and he goes, her D was bigger than mine. Haha, classic Thailand. Every military person ever stationed overseas, yes. Not military, but my biological father is. He came to Panama during the Noriega invasion. He knocked up my mom after telling her he was single and wanted to start a family with her in the US. Time comes for him to go back to the US and he tells my mom he's actually married and left immediately. Another soldier ended up marrying my mom and adopted me as his daughter. He is who I consider my actual father. Nice try. Military spouse. Well, not technically stationed, but I did a joint training deployment to the UK. I asked a girl off the street to lunch in the town of Bath. Lunch was nice but didn't lead anywhere. So I shagged a pro in London a couple days later. I had the opportunity to go brothel hopping while training in Panama, but decided not to go. Sadly, that's all I've got. My grandpa was serving in Germany and married a local. They moved to the US with their 2 babies. Spent about 40 years together until they passed 3 weeks apart. Not me, but a friend I had at my language training course. At the end of our military training course in MSA Modern Standard Arabic, we're permitted to go to Morocco for a few weeks. We're told to be on our best behavior and pretty much to not duck the locals. Buddy of mine ended up having a one-night stand without using a condom and ended up getting the girl pregnant. She sued for rights to give her child citizenship and raise him in the US, and it was a big whole mess for my friend and his command. He ended up getting kicked out and having to pay a ridiculous amount to fund a visa and citizenship for his baby mama and child, and then a ductin in child support. I am US Army for the past 15 years. When I was stationed in Germany, it was mandatory for all soldiers to get a 4-day weekend every month. Every month soldiers would scatter around Europe, and I'll let you use your imagination on what was going down, lol. I personally fell in love with a German chick. Should have married her. But I got deployed and a girl like that isn't going to wait around for a year for a guy who might only be able to call home once a month. But yeah, anyways, soldiers duck. No matter where they get sent, they will find a way, lol. I married her. Had a 1 in a million deployment as an instructor for a training mission in Europe. Based out of Prague, we trained countries' militaries on specific things. So it was basically an office gig 90% of the time. We were in Pilsen and the troops we were training offered to take us out that night. Ended up getting mega wasted. Had sex with a girl. And I went home. Only it turned out that the girl had my number and started texting me. We eventually met up a few more times. Some in Pilsen and some in Prague. A few months later she moved to Prague with me. When my deployment was up, we got engaged. I went back to the States for a while until my enlistment was up. We got married and I moved back. We now live in Pilsen, where her family is from. And we had 2 kids. I'm back in the States now, taking care of family matters. But it doesn't feel like home. Just counting down the days till I'm back in Europe. My dad. Before he was my dad, when in the Navy in the late mid-80s, was stationed in Italy. Apparently he hooked up with some mob boss's daughter and got her pregnant with twins. Her dad threatened to do the mafia stuff to him if he was ever seen in Italy again. So the next morning he goes AWOL and tries to get back to the States. Made it. Knocked up my mom. Then gets thrown in prison. Thanks, Dad. I'm not military, but my grandfather was military intelligence. Ended up in Indonesia for a while and at one point found himself at some diplomatic get-together where met the daughter, my grandmother, of the chief of police of Jakarta and was instantly smitten. Her father did not approve. For at least 2 reasons. My grandfather was American and 19 years her senior. Her father puts her under house arrest so that they can't see each other. And meanwhile, my grandfather is in trouble with his superiors for pissing off the chief of police. She happens to have a sneaky maid who facilitates them passing letters back and forth to each other. One night, she sneaks out in the middle of the night, meets up with my grandfather, and they elope to the Philippines before flying back to America, where she's lived ever since. They were happily married until his dying day, about 20 years ago. He treated her like an absolute queen, and she adored him and has never remarried. This seems like a good idea to answer that in no way will endanger your security clearance. I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer, so not exactly what you're looking for, but a girl in my group. We were in an East African country, met on HCN, host country national, and they hit it off pretty fast. She ended up getting pregnant very early into our training, took a pregnancy test and got a false negative, continued to party and live her life, but eventually took another test and it confirmed the pregnancy. It was pretty scandalous and she had to immediately return home. But she remained in a long distance relationship with her boyfriend and a few years ago he moved here to be with her and they got married. Their little boy is 4 or 5 now. Hey, I know someone who did this. My husband. The story is I was 8 months pregnant and we got divorced and he got sent home from deployment. Puccini composed an entire opera about how terrible of an idea that is. Yup, married her a year later. 15 years this year. Not me but my ex-husband. While on TDY in Puerto Rico, so kinda overseas but not a full-on deployment, he went on Craigslist in the personal section and replied to a post called Military Cum Dump. Basically a cuck wanted US military dudes to bang his wife. He said he'd raise the kid as his own if she got pregnant. I found the emails and let the dude know that he was married. My ex completely denied it ever happening, but I had screenshots. One of the many reasons he's my ex, lol. It happens a lot in the military. Most of the other spouses I knew had either dealt with cheating or settled on an open marriage while deployed type of situation because of it.